shirts. So what you really ought to do is make sure that your country can do everything by itself, and only then do you bother opening your borders. Right? So these are two completely different understandings of the way the world works. Neither of them necessarily alone tell us a lot about economic growth. We can't decide between them just by knowing much about the theories, right? So the next thing you have to do is come up with some hypotheses. What would the world look like if this theory were true? And what would the world look like if this theory were true? This is a huge, huge part of selling this is like the first big sales pitch right here. This is all just setup. We've got a big question. We've got a handful of ways of how we think it might work. Now we have to think about how we might prove whether free trade or closed borders is better at growing the economy. What do you think the world might look like in the free trade world that would be different than the closed border world? What could we go out and look at?
A country that has had free trade policies for a long time.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like, we would expect to see countries that have free trade. If this is true, right, we would expect to see countries that have free trade have better economies, right? So then our null hypothesis would be what? Did you guys go over the null hypothesis thing very much? I forget from the stats lecture.
It would be that the countries that do have free trade policies aren't any richer than those who don't.
Exactly right. So in this case, you'd have free equals good, and then your null hypothesis would be free equals whatever. There's no effect, right? In this world with closed borders, you take a look at all the countries with closed borders, see if they grew faster, and your null hypothesis would be the same. There's no association, right? So now what we're trying to do is say, okay, this is a pretty straightforward derivation of a hypothesis from a theory. We've got countries that engage in free trade should grow faster. This is a way that we can test our hypothesis. Then we move on to the idea of measurement. The tricky thing about measurement, how do we define free trade? How do we go out and tell whether a country is engaged in free trade? How do we know whether their economy is growing? We might use GDP per capita, but then we've got a country with Bill Gates and 10 orphans, and they look really rich. So your measurement strategy is extremely important too. After you define your measurement strategy, you go out, you try and actually measure the data. A lot of times this gets screwed up because the kids aren't paying attention in the class, or that it's loud, or they don't get the computer fired up the right way. You have all these sorts of problems that happen with the data that you're going to be working with, but you have to come up with a way to collect the data the best way. And once you've done all of this work, once you've explained to someone what your big question is and how there are different theories in the world that might explain it, how you're going to test between them and actually measure the concepts that you've laid out, then you build it back out. You say, okay, I've got this statistical association between free trade and GDP per capita. We know that that measurement is good. I've justified why my free trade measurement is good and why GDP per capita is the right growth measurement. So that means that this hypothesis is right, that means that free trade is right, and that means what drives economic growth is free trade. And now we have this conclusion we can use. We can go out into the world and say what we need to do is open up borders. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So the idea for the class is to take a couple of weeks on each of these concepts. Probably we'll be able to speed through these things a little bit faster because you guys have been thinking about a big question already. But I think that the first assignment will probably be, give me a half page where you sell someone who really only cares about civil war and would rather be doing surveys in a refugee camp why your question matters. If I'm interested, it's a win. Because I don't know anything about education policy, she's giving me a look like I should care more about this. Right. If I'm interested, though, it's a win. So give me your sales pitch. We'll practice sales pitches. We'll practice convincing people that the question that you're onto matters for education policy and matters for the outcomes of the students that are there. Then we'll probably spend a week or two building your literature reviews. I'll want to know what previous people have said about your question. Where did this question come from? Why do we think the world might work one way rather than the other? Then we'll spend probably a fair amount of time thinking about defining your hypotheses and measurement. Because if you come up with good hypotheses and good measurement, you can really sell people on the idea that what you're doing is testing between these two theories. There are a lot of ways that you can test badly between these two theories. You know, for example, if you define economic well-being as just GDP per capita as opposed to how healthy the poorest people are. Those are two very, very different concepts, right? In one case, you could have handful of very rich people and a bunch of very poor people. You have a high GDP per capita. In the other, you're defining some sort of floor below which the poorest people can't fall. You might think about inequality. You might think about a lot of different ways to measure economic development that will cause your audience to think differently about your conclusion. So we'll spend a lot of time thinking about how hypothesis and measurement works. And as you're working through this, this is when you're going to be making your data requests. And the idea at this point is that the paper has written itself, right? You've done your big pitch, you've made your predictions, you know how the data should look depending upon which of your theories is right. And when you get your regression results back, it's just this supports this theory, or it rejects this theory, or it's we can't tell. There's no statistically significant relationship, so it's impossible to tell. So then the advantage of this class is that anytime a consultancy or a public policy NGO or any of these sorts of places wants to know, is Obamacare working? Do we need tighter immigration laws? Or do immigrants benefit our economy? They're going to hit you with these really big questions, and you'll be able to go out into the literature and say, okay, on one hand, we might think that immigrants demand a bunch of services that drag the economy down. The tax-paying citizens are footing the bill for all these immigrants. Or we might also think logically that these people are bringing in a ton of expertise, and they're bringing in, the ability to do labor in places that didn't have their labor markets fulfilled, right? And if you can think about those as two theories, then you would have hypotheses. You would generate hypotheses about how much social services immigrants use, where they're employed, how much they pay in taxes, all of these sorts of things that enrich the immigration debate, right? Like we see this on the news. And so the key is for you to be able to say, the things that I've measured build back up into answering this bigger question. And that becomes a more complicated sales pitch. And as you guys start to do your papers, you'll see how easy it is to pick apart the first ideas that you have. Say, oh, I think actually what you're measuring is this. Or actually, if this association turns out to be true, it might support the opposing theory. And so you have to sharpen these things down to attack so that that asshole in the back of the room can't raise his hand and say, no, actually, I think that the fact that immigrants pay a lot of taxes shows that they're bad for the economy. You want to be ready to handle those objections. So the goal of the course for the next 10 weeks is to guide you guys through that project, to think about how you sell each of the steps where you're thinking, okay, this is actually a good test of this theory. This is actually a good measurement of this concept. And that's a skill that can benefit you in a wide variety of policy or political jobs or jobs in economics or those sorts of things. Do you have questions about this? I'm going to go through this in more detail. We're going to talk through more examples on Monday so we have an idea of where the class is going. But these are the assignments, right? I want to know your theories. I want to know the hypotheses. Those sorts of things as we go forward. And then you'll have these sections of your paper written, so when you get the data back, it's just filling in the blanks. How does that sound? I can change this. How much of this have you done before in this class?
We've done the first three.
You've done the first three, right? Okay.
I repeat.
And we keep doing that over and over
Yeah,
again.
over and over.
So we should probably rush through those unless you guys are changing your papers.
No, we should go over them.
Oh, we should go over them.
Yeah,
then.
because
Okay.
everyone, I think, changed their papers.
Got it.
So-
Okay. So then how about this? I think that the first week of class will probably be a bunch of me talking to you. It'll probably be short too. I don't think I'll talk at you for an hour and a half. But let's say I'll talk at you for 45 minutes to an hour and I'll take questions and I'll go through a really detailed example of how these papers kind of look. Maybe another thing that I'll try and do is if you could find a paper in the education sector that and just highlight. I don't want to make you guys read 10 academic length papers from peer-reviewed journals, but if we can highlight these things out so you can see, oh, here's the place where they're hooking you in, here's the place where they're stating their theories, here's where you get the hypotheses. I know a handful of articles that'll lay that out clearly. So the first week will be about this pattern and about the template that everyone uses for their policy memos and everyone uses for their academic papers. And then it'll turn into a workshop where the majority of what we do every week is someone from your group stands up and says, okay, you'll recall that I have this question and these two theories. I've derived the following observable implications. The world should look like X, Y, Z, and W if this theory is right, and A, B, C, and D if this theory is right. which of these hypotheses do you guys buy? What's wrong with them? And workshop it. Does that sound like it would be productive? Okay. So then every group or every person, if you're doing a solo paper, will have 2 or 3 minutes to present an update on their work, and then they'll take 5-6 minutes of questions and criticism. And then maybe at a couple of these stops, what I'll do is have you upload a draft of your paper, not all the way through and incomplete, but up to the point where we are, and then you get to pick a different group's paper to review. And then when we get into measurement and data, we'll talk a lot more about causal inference and what it means to try and actually identify a cause. Because that's like the hardest thing to do, right? Like if you can identify a cause in econ or political science or sociology, you're on your way to like a top tier publication, or you're on your way to a partnership at a consultancy or a nonprofit thing or another. Okay. Questions?
I have a question just because my group, we were the school lunch program, but we were kind of told to change our focus because the connection we were drawing from nutrition to education was too loose. So basically over the last couple of weeks, we've decided to kind of drop the education aspect of our project.
Okay.
But it sounds like...
well, here's...
It could still...
maybe Melissa needs every project to be about education. I personally don't care.
Yeah.
If you guys have other data,
Yeah.
places you can go to find ways to test, all I care about is that you're doing this.
Okay.
If you want to do a paper about, why certain people become terrorists and others don't, or, why certain communities decide to vote for Donald Trump and others don't, or whatever sorts of thing you want to test, if you can find data, it doesn't even have to be quantitative, right? A lot of observations that we might go out and test aren't found in stats. We just figure that we would go to a certain place and we would observe a certain type of community structure or institution, or we would expect that a certain place would be an autocracy and another place would be a democracy, and those things might be numbers, but they're not really numbers, right? So as far as I'm concerned, you can do whatever project you want. I think the advantage in doing education is that you've been in classrooms where these kids are taking these surveys, right? You know what's wrong with what we did. You know what's right with what we did. You helped write the survey. You know what some of the questions were that were motivating them. So the disadvantage in abandoning education entirely would be that you're sort of starting from scratch, whereas you guys have a lot of institutional knowledge about what happened in this survey.
Yeah, but I mean, if the structure is solid and your methods are solid, there should be no problem, right?
Yeah. Well, and look, some of the data that we gathered doesn't need to be about education, right? Micah Gell-Redman, who was the RA last year and is an associate professor at Georgia State now, put an experiment in the survey about whether kids trust local government more than the federal government, right? So he's going to try and draw some policy conclusions about education and politics that way. But there's a lot of interesting stuff in that question. It doesn't have anything to do with education or education policy. It's just about trust.
And hopefully we'll have not only the survey results, but also the PISA test results by then. So you can also draw on those, like if you want to make those sorts of connections. Maybe you will not be able to prove any kind of causal inference between nutrition and education, but you can show that there are some correlations perhaps.
Yeah.
So.
Do you guys all have a copy of the survey?
Yes.
So one of the things and again, if you decide to abandon education, I'll go to the mat for you with Melissa. If she says no, I don't.
Melissa was the one that suggested that.
Leaving education entirely?
So,
then it should be easy. Do whatever you want to do. And that goes for all of you. If you have questions you'd rather tackle than the education questions, the challenge you're going to have is that you have to go out and find data rather than convince me that the data that we have gathered already is the right data, which might be tough, right? There are questions on this survey that don't make a lot of sense to the students. So you might say, oh, I'm going to use question 18 to measure this particular concept in my hypothesis. And I'll say, I had 15 kids in the last time that I gave the survey ask me what that question meant. Do you think there's any internal validity here? Do you think that you're actually measuring what you think you're measuring? And then you might have to go back to the drawing board. Or you can find data where you think there might be good data. But I think that this is about brainstorming, and if you're going to stay in the class, becoming repassionate about a project that you can see through for 10 weeks. Like I said, I'm sorry that this went poorly. I think that this should have been a really enriching experience for you guys. And I think that there's still the possibility that it will be, because you have learned more than you think you have learned. It's just that no one has really structured it in a way that allows you to connect the dots.
Yeah, the fact that you were able to be in the field is really valuable itself. Now you know the challenges that there are to collect data, and now you can use those to your advantage to know what kind of questions you want to use, what kind of questions you don't want to use, and why they're relevant to you. So
I see the grad students in the room nodding a little bit more when I say this too, because you guys have had to put this together before in a way, right?
Yeah,
And so
you're gonna practically teach everyone how to write a paper.
Yeah.
That's priceless. I don't know.
Right. Right.
It takes years of training.
Well, and this is the thing. Like this is why I keep getting hired to do the IRPS job, right? To do the data lab version of that class, is because there is a formula to this, and it can be hard to articulate and hard to teach, right? This is, to some way, it's an art and it's feeling your way through. But I know how to make this sales pitch, and I know when people are doing it, and I know how to pick apart bad sales pitches. So if you want to use that half of the class for that kind of work, then I'm going to be reading your stuff every week, and I'm going to be telling you, okay, I think that you might have a problem with claiming that this correlation, which might evidence causation both ways, is just causing it one way. How would you identify that? That's another thing I'll be asking you guys, actually. If you could do it again, what would you ask? What would you observe if you had the time to go and do it again? I can't prove that this correlation means causation, because there's, I've laid out 4 theories. 2 of them would predict this correlation, but one would have it go east-west and the other west-east. If I could, I would ask this question, or I would interview students in this way to try and elicit this response. And if they say this, we know it's theory A, and if they say that, we know it's theory C. But I can't distinguish between those things. All the points in the world for being able to do that. All the points in the world for predicting something and being wrong and proving that you were wrong. It's all about being able to go through the theories and say, if the world works like this on an abstract level, we should be able to walk outside and observe this rather than that. And I know that I'm observing this rather than that because I have found a way to characterize these variables that's unassailable. And if you can stand in front of a group of people and do that, hand waving, dancing, knowing that social sciences can't prove anything the way that chemistry can, then at some point someone's going to notice and you're going to have a good job. So think about whether you still want to be in the class, and hopefully you do, because I have fun with this. And teaching 2 classes like this in a quarter will be a lot of fun for me.
And there's going to be a lot of data, and we'll manage to work around the data so that you can use it to answer the questions that you want to answer. So just take advantage of that if you're still interested. We really hope you are.
And I think, we can take time too to talk a little bit more about how we're doing the data in Stata or R or whatever, and those sorts of things. If that becomes something that the class wants to do, I'm flexible about that. I think that I need to nail Melissa down a little bit more on the assignments and make the templates look more like I want them to.
Yeah, if most of you are interested in knowing how to work on R or Stata, we can maybe run some of the analysis here on the screen so that you guys know kind of what we're doing behind the scenes, because you're going to have to interpret this data. So if most of you are interested in knowing how this works, we can also work around that, perhaps.
Does this sound structured enough? Does it sound like in 10 weeks we can teach you something that's worth learning? If you have other suggestions, email me. I'm serious. I think that it should be possible for me to tailor this class to be something that is concrete enough that people who want to learn something roughly like this should be able to take something away from it. That's all I have for today. Is there anything else that you guys want to talk about, or? Okay. So then the Thursday session of this, you can expect this lecture in a lot more detail with a lot more examples. And I will do something that I think is fun, which is take the last 15 minutes to run through my radicalization project in Somalia and explain to you all of the reasons that we are probably going to measure it wrong. Spending tens of thousands of dollars of other people's money to get the wrong answer, because if you can't survey high schoolers without them cracking up and pressing buttons on each other's laptop, what are you going to do with people who are actually terrorists when you knock on their door and say, hi, would you like to take a survey? Anyway, good. Yeah. Email me stuff, though, seriously. Oh, yeah?
Do you know where classes, or will you know about that?
We do not know where class is. That will be something that I nail down with more notice than 10 minutes before class starts.
Yes. Today was on one exception.
Yeah, so, I mean, I hate to throw people under the bus, but I found out like an hour ago that I was just teaching this class today, so. It was a mess, I apologize. Oh, and I made some pretty graphs that I can't put up there. The data's not completely screwed.
Yeah, but I think that there's a way to do it. Like, do you know how to do that?
No, Marcel tried
Here's
to
the thing.
explain, but I can't.
I'll email you this stuff, but we took some time and we figured out just the dispersion, just some histograms of what the data look like, so you guys can have a sense of what's available. Melissa thought this was going to be really exciting, so I did it. I don't know if showing you these graphs up on the...
Do you want to try? Want me to try?
I did. I couldn't get the TV to turn on is the problem.
Okay, I've seen Marcella doing this before.
All right.
I'm going to try.
Give me 1 minute to see if the pretty graphs can go online. But otherwise, I'll just email you guys a slideshow of the stuff, and so it's real self-explanatory. The idea is just we type some things in the computer and then it spit out nice graphs of how the data looks in some ways.
Yeah, there's no turn on bottom. Oh, here.
Oh, metal.
There we go. And then it's the
I think it's PC.
PC. Yep.
Oh.
See, I think. Oh, here we go. I think the problem is that the remote is out of battery.
Okay, there we go. PC. Is that your computer?
It is my computer.
What's that?
Welcome to Joshua Tree. Hey, there we go. All right, so this is showing you how, I just lost the word, how aspirational students are versus how aspirational they think their friends are. So most of them think that their friends are really only interested in high school or GED, whether you're in Tijuana or San Diego, but they are interested in getting an MA, right? So they just hang out with a bunch of idiots or something. I don't know. I thought that was pretty funny. Years of schooling. So this is just the same thing. The years of schooling aspiration, Tijuana versus San Diego. The kids in Tijuana are more ambitious. There was a higher no answer rate among the San Diego kids. Maybe if you chunked that out evenly, you'd catch up on some of these. But you'll notice that the Tijuana kids say that they want to get an MA more often than San Diego kids. That was pretty cool. Whether they want to attend college across the border.
Question.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I just thought that I can't stop this brain. Is that the whole thing, or is it just like prepas from Tijuana?
This is just prepas and just the schools that were finished in San
Okay.
Diego at the time that I ran the data.
Okay.
So,
Because in secundarias it might change
It's just
the...
oh, you know what? It's
Super
just secundarios.
It's just secundarios
It's
and
just secundarios and the students that are in here. So these are maybe, now here's a great question, right? Do kids get more ambitious as they get more schooling, or do they get less ambitious?
That's
And is
where I
it the
was going.
same in Tijuana as it is in San Diego? Maybe in the United States, as you get closer to graduating high school and you see your friends that are older going to college, you think, oh, never mind, I'm not dropping out, I'm going to try and go to college. Whereas in Tijuana, you get worn down if fewer of your friends are going. Maybe there are ways, if the general trend is different in the US versus Mexico, maybe there are ways to pick out types of Mexican students that do get more ambitious, or types of American students that do get less ambitious, and what predicts those off the, right?
And it would be interesting to see when we have the prepas, And if we have compared 9th grade with secundarias and 10th grade with prepas, to see if those aspirations change.
There are a whole ton of complicated ways that you could try and use these
Mhm.
statistics to prove this point, and a whole ton of ways that will pick you apart from the back of the
Yes.
room for trying it. But like this is if you try that sort of a thing, even if we're picking you apart, you're going to get a good grade. Like that's great research.
Mhm.
See, this is why you need to talk more to her because she's going to be able to brainstorm this stuff better than I can. Can I go back? Is this? Oh, there we go. So this is not super shocking, right? Tons and tons of students in Tijuana want to come to college in the United States, but not very many Americans want to go to college in Mexico. Again, picking the outliers here would be a really great strategy. What's up with these kids? Is it their family? Have they heard good things about COLEF or UABC and they know that the Mexican labor market is good for them? Or is there a way to educate San Diego students that have a connection to Mexico and could plausibly be linguistically and culturally fluent in the Mexican workplace to go to college in Mexico and maximize their opportunities by going there? Shopping trips?
Never.
Just shopping trips. Most people never
No
go. Almost no one goes daily except a handful of San Diego people who are maybe coming across the border anyway for school.
And maybe checking out like the location of their schools. We have the location of their schools.
Right.
I mean, this is something that I want to do personally, and maybe it's super interesting to try to map the schools and try to map.
You would
You
have
know,
to
all
gather
those
this
kind of
gather
things.
this data yourself, but how many miles from the border are each of the schools?
Exactly.
It's not part of our data set, but you could easily add it to the data we
Yes.
have.
So that can be another thing, like try to find distances from schools and how many kids come to school from Mexico or how many schools are doing this every day, things like that. That's something that else that you can do. It's not entirely related to education, but the implications that it has on migration and education policies are huge, right? So I'm just throwing on our ideas, you know.
No, that's just the first shopping trips across the border. These are just the students who've crossed the border. I think this is the last one that I've done. So we see that the Sweetwater percentage is higher than the percentage of students from Tijuana, which is not what I expected, actually. I expected that the Mexican students would be coming back and forth more often than the American students. And maybe if when we gather the data from San Diego Unified, we'll see this even out because the kids from San Diego won't cross the border, right? As often because they're further away, or because they don't have family ties, or because of a whole lot of reasons that are probably intuitive. But maybe there's a reason that would be important, or a way that you could prove a point. So super basic analytics. The data are not clean enough for us to be running regressions or doing crosstabs yet, but you can see how some of this stuff might develop into a good paper though.
And we're trying to have the data as clean as possible for us to run the analysis that you want us to run, and also try to have it as disaggregated or aggregated as you want us to have it. So if you want to make comparison between 9th and 10th graders just in one school because you want to see their changes, you can do that. But also if you want to do it at comparing the whole Sweetwater school district to the whole Tijuana schools, you can also do that. So
this is, as you're thinking about your projects, this is a really fantastic way to prove subtle points about social phenomenon, is to say, we expect this relationship between X and Y to be different in schools that are close to the border than further away. And that should show us that the effect of the border, like that's changing the way that students view things on average. It's introducing heterogeneous treatment effect of our X variable, is how you would say it, right? Like X means something different as you get progressively closer to the border, and it actually reverses sign or something. Like those are the sort of counterintuitive findings that get nerds like us really excited. And so because you can batch the data this way, you can do a lot of that kind of stuff. You can identify schools we have their API scores from all of their testing, so you can test rich schools versus poor schools in America. I don't think we have that data for Tijuana, but you could do it with the PISA scores.
Not only that, but we can also, like, there's a website where you can, if you have the name of the school and like you know it because you've been there, although technically the names of the schools are supposed to be undisclosed, right? UABC?
I think that's right. But
well, anyway, we
would
will give you the information that you need if you want to do school level analysis, like the distance of the border, the APA, the API scores. If you want to do it in Tijuana, there's a website from the government that has a level of it's
The
called
socioeconomic.
the socioeconomic status, like how far or how many services do schools in Tijuana have and things like that. It's called rezago. Do you know, like, those of you that speak Spanish, do you know the word in English for that? Rezago?
Anyway, y'all doubtless
Anyway.
remember the list of data sources that
Yes.
she put up on the board the
There
last
is
time
a
we were all
way,
here.
so you can like just take this time to rethink if you want what is it that you want to answer, and if you come up with something, a connection between what you saw in the survey and something else, we're gonna try to help you find that.
Cool. Thanks for coming in today, guys.
Thank you. A las 9:30.
Pero déjame quitarme.
No. La Semana Santa corre del 21 hasta el 27.
Hasta el 27.
O sea, el 21 de marzo es lunes.
Según yo es, bueno, es la primera de, bueno, a lo mejor es que si no,
Es que mira, yo voy a Guadalajara del 13 al 19. Que es lo que dura el congreso. El 20, 21 es sábado.
You're off the hook.
Y el lunes. Sí, no. El lunes ya es la Semana Santa. Ya después de correr toda esa semana, ya.
Oh, who's that?
O sea, no estamos
la
bien.
Semana Santa.
Eso ya no
Entonces sí podríamos pedir transporte ese día. Pero para venir a la clase,
Pues no, también dijo que por Skype.
Unfortunately, can't continue, but
Ajá.
I'm really trying
Pero
pero
a way to
la
how to
reunión
stay in the
podríamos
class.
tener por Luis.
I spoke to Melissa and she said
Podríamos
that
que
she would be okay with me staying, you know, like some of the
Oh,
work.
and continuing to work with you.
Or now that you guys are talking individually, like I work on my own, so I know I can possibly do an independent study. So I gotta make it one, but I have to check with my counselor if that can work. We can only do one per quarter.
I wouldn't want to work for
So
something.
it's really like
Well, if you find some way that you're not with us in class, but you want to have the advising project, that works for you.
because if it's an independent study, I know it requires an advisor, so it's not that way with you guys.
Yeah, whoever is the instructor of record, I think you probably come to Mariana.
Yeah, so that's probably the only way possible because the class schedule is during the class that's a requirement.
Got it.
So
Yeah, that's unfortunate. It's too bad that I believe we
No
way! Well, Melissa said she thought it would be better. I prefer the one block. But I'll be around somewhere or another. I know I told her if I can even be part of in the 18th and UABC I want to do a presentation, she said that was fine. So
Oh,
I'll be
okay.
around. I mean, I'm not going to be so much in class, but I'll be emailing you guys.
However you want to work it, just let us know.
Okay.
Yeah.
These are for meetings with Melissa, right?
Yes.
Okay, I'm not here that day. It's after spring break and I'm flying home on that Monday.
Got it.
But I'll email her.
Yep, that's perfect.
Because she was reading the email and she's like.